Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening for our webinar. This is Podcast Learnings. So I'll do the little intro and then we'll come back to, you can see our esteemed guests who are with us this evening. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Welcome to Podcast Learnings. It, of course, is Monday, December 13th. You've got just over 2 weeks to finish buying all your Christmas gifts. And this evening, we have Rob Brake from the Breakthrough Real Estate Investing Podcast, Sarah Larby, and Erwin Szeto as well with us. Erwin has The Truth About Real Estate Investing. And Sarah, yours is called Sarah Larby, is it? Or can you fill us in on the full name, please?
My podcast, I actually have two. One is called Where Should I Invest? And the other one is the Right Club Podcast.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for a Monday evening in December. Really, really appreciate your time joining us both as guests and as attendees. So we're going to have a little bit of fun this evening. Our agenda will be the same as usual. So we'll do the welcome and introductions. We're going to do the panelist discussion. Then we'll have Q&A at the end. So people are welcome to ask questions. Then we'll do the webinar wrap up and I'll talk about what's coming up for 2022. Super excited for our lineup for next year. Just a reminder, a few housekeeping items for those of you who, after 2 years of Zoom meetings, just in case you manage to somehow escape all the craziness that goes on, just a little orientation on Zoom for you. So in the bottom of your screen, you should see something that looks like this little rectangle, black rectangle on the bottom. You should see a little tab for chat, one for raise your hand, and then one for Q&A. So I encourage everybody, we love our webinars to be interactive. We love to know what you're thinking, and obviously we can't see you, so we love your feedback in the chat box. Make sure when you're chatting though, change the drop-down menu. It defaults to all panelists. So make sure you change it to panelists and attendees, or it might say everyone, whatever version of Zoom you have. But if you just send it to panelists and attendees, then only the 4 of us up here are going to hear or see that. So make sure that you include everyone, because of course we love to be interactive as much as possible. If you have questions to ask the panelists, then go to the Q&A tab, please, and put it in there. Sometimes when the chat box gets going, we kind of lose track of questions. So we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to circle back when we get a couple of minutes and make sure your question gets asked. So please interact with us in the chat box. Any specific questions for the panelists in the future, put in the Q&A. So my name is Elizabeth Kelly. I am your host for this evening. I am super excited about this one because this one I have been planning for months. Super excited about our webinar tonight because now I have the opportunity to turn the tables and ask some of Canada's best known podcast hosts, ask them some questions, tips, tricks, in case you're thinking you might like to do a podcast, but also some of their experiences and what they've learned as a podcast host, some of their best guests, that kind of stuff. So really glad you're able to join us this evening. And these are in no particular order. It's not that I love Rob more, but just so you know, we're going to start with Rob for the introductions. Now, I've decided to do something a little fun this evening. So we're actually going to do rapid fire questions because it's really easy just to read everybody's, blah, blah introduction. So what we're going to do, I'll do a quick introduction and then we're going to circle back and we'll go through and I'll ask everybody the rapid fire questions. Those should finish within a couple of minutes. But if you're not familiar with any of these podcasts or any of these hosts, you'll get the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about them really quickly and easily. Was that a bird that just went by, Rob? That's so amazing. For those of you who don't know, Rob's in Costa Rica right now, where he is going to be for the foreseeable future. So it's been really eventful to watch what's going on. So Rob is an entrepreneur. He's a real estate investor. He's a realtor, and he's recently relocated to Costa Rica. He's flipping houses as well as an active realtor down in Costa Rica. So we're super lucky to have Rob with us. Rob, you're not in a different time zone, right? You're just on our same time?
No, it's a little bit earlier here. It's 6:06 right now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you could join us over the dinner hour.
No problem. It's dark here already, though, so probably gets dark at the same time.
Oh, okay, perfect. Fantastic. All right, so our next guest is Sarah Larby, and Sarah is truly one of my favorite women to watch in the world of real estate. Accomplished, poised, really gets out there and has a fantastic message to share with investors. And I'm honored to have Sarah. I think this is the first time, well, we recorded a podcast a few weeks ago, but this is the first time you and I have really been able to kind of chat and catch up. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for the invite, and I'm excited.
Perfect. Thank you. And our last but not least, our guest this evening is Erwin Szeto. And Erwin, of course, is the host of Truth About Real Estate Investing for Canadians. And he calls himself an investopreneur. But Erwin has a ton of things going on. He's the founder of iWin, or the Infinity Wealth Investment Network. Erwin is an active realtor. He's also the founder of Stock Hacker Academy, where real estate investors can learn to diversify their portfolio and get a little bit into the world of stocks and investings that way. So I'm going to switch it over to the rapid fire questions. So everybody has had a chance to see the questions, but only for a few hours. And I'm going to be asking, when and why did you decide to start? How much time do you dedicate a week to your podcast? How does most of your audience find you? And what is your podcast superpower? So once we get through those and we get everybody warmed up, then we'll get into the discussion for the evening. These are the questions that I have prepared. As always, you guys, if you have a question that you'd love to have answered, please use your Q&A at the bottom and feel free to ask away. If you want to address it to a specific speaker, just make sure you put their name first. So first question is going to be, do you think anybody can learn to be a successful host? Since you can't see your audience's reaction, how do you know if you're going in the right direction? How has being a podcast host changed your investment journey? What is your biggest learning from a guest? What do you know now that you wish you had known when you started investing? What are you planning for 2022? And any tips, tricks, or insider secrets to share? All right. So let me just stop my share here. There we go. All right. So shall we start with Rob? You were up first for the intro. So how about we start first with you with the rapid fire?
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. When and why did you decide to start with the podcast?
Well, it was a long time ago. If you didn't ask me this and I didn't do the research, I wouldn't have exactly remembered. But when we started, our first podcast was actually released January of 2014. That was our very first episode.
Wow.
And it's one that I encourage people to not listen to. Just skip that one and go straight to the second one. But, and that's because we were still learning, right? And I mean, I guess there's a little tidbits in there. If people actually want to go listen to that one, there is little tidbits, but it was definitely pretty rough. So that was the first one. And where did we get the idea? Why did we start it? Well, for those of you who don't know, I host the podcast with Sandy McKay, and we were both at the time really just getting into being active real estate investors. We had maybe a couple of properties at the time, and we're just sort of, well, me anyways, I was just kind of coasting along for quite some time until I started going to Quentin D'Souza's Durham Real Estate Investors Club and met Sandy there. We would just get on the phone and we would talk pretty much for hours about real estate investing, what we'd learned that day, because I was listening to other podcasts. And what we found at the time was that there wasn't really anything Canadian focused. There's lots of information, but some of it, maybe even the majority of it, doesn't necessarily translate to Canadian investing, especially when it came to things like wholesaling and that kind of thing, which I was really, really interested in. You could do it, but there's these big differences in the way that you had to structure things. So it was more of, my kid is poking his head out the door. What are you doing? Okay. Yeah, thank you. He says, good setup. Go on in. So anyway, it was more just that we wanted to monopolize these other investors' time who knew more than us. and we wanted to be able to learn from them. And this was the perfect way of doing it, saying, hey, you know, we're doing a podcast. We can hopefully promote you. Come on, and we'll ask you all the things that we want to know.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna put a clock on you, Rob, because these are supposed to be rapid fire.
Well, you want short? I can give you short answers.
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
you wanted long wind.
No, the long-winded ones come next.
Okay.
This is just a warm-up for you. How much time do you dedicate a week to your podcast?
2 to 3 hours.
Okay, that's awesome. Do you do all your own editing and everything, or you have people for that?
Not anymore.
Okay.
Someone else does it now.
How do most people in your audience find you?
I would imagine they just search up Canadian real estate investing.
Okay, perfect. And what is your podcast superpower? What do you think makes you stand out from other people who are doing podcasts?
Well, I don't know if it necessarily makes us stand out from other people, but I believe that, I believe something we do right is sincerity. We don't try to flash it up and be gurus. We really just try to help and talk to regular people who have something to share.
Gotcha. Absolutely. I love that. That's such a great superpower to have too, because I would imagine it translates really well into other areas of your life. Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Okay, Sarah, you up? You ready?
All right, ready.
Okay. So when and why did you decide to start doing a podcast?
I learned a lot initially from listening to other podcasts. Bigger Pockets mostly was obviously American content, and back then I didn't think that there were so many Canadian specific real estate podcasts. I think Rob, yours was out there, started in 2017, and I remember going to the Tony Robbins Wealth, whatever that big wealth thing, and there was like Pitbull there. Anyways, that was maybe in 2017. And I ended up doing one of those breakout sessions. Didn't even know where I was going, but it ended up being about podcasting. And I took the guy's class and I'm like, okay, I already paid $500 for this. I'm just going to go with it and just see what happens. And I'll tell you, originally, like, you know, I used to do them on the phone and record using my phone. Like, it was horrible audio, but I got it done. I'm kind of the person that does like ready, fire, aim. Here we are today.
That's awesome. I love it. And so what was the exact motivation? Just you wanted to learn more, you wanted to connect with more people? Like, what was your...
I think originally it was, I wanted to make sure that people had Canadianized real estate investing content. And I had a few, a handful of properties at the time, wanted to, teach others how to do it and make sure that they had Canadianized real estate investing specifics rather than trying to figure it out from the US.
Gotcha. Love it. Okay. How much time do you dedicate each week to your podcast?
So basically from September until May, I do Mondays afternoons only, and I do 4 podcasts. And then, sometimes there's less of them, and then I do nothing. So I like batch record them so that I can not have to record or do anything indoors in the summer.
Gotcha. That's awesome. So it comes out once a week then for you?
It does. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. How does most of your audience find you?
I guess through like just Apple Podcasts. That's probably, I'm obviously on Google and Stitcher, but I think a lot of people do the Apple Podcasts, or maybe they'll search using the search tab, and I think likely from there.
Okay, perfect. What is your podcast superpower?
There's not many women doing this in Canada in real estate investing.
Love it. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Erwin, are you ready to go for your rapid fire? Okay, perfect. When and why did you decide to start doing a podcast?
Started the podcast in 2016 after I've been internet blogging since 2010. So it's really just more of a shift in format between switching from writing to typing and largely email based to do an audio format.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. And why did you decide to start with a podcast, to make it more interactive?
Well, the show's called Truth About Real Estate Investing. The original motivation, the blog was to, put out valuable content so people could learn some best practices. And then actually out of frustration, I named the podcast The Truth About Real Estate Investing, because there's just so many shysters in this space. There's so much lack of transparency. When people like F up deals, they don't share, people don't talk about it, people don't get called out. So that's why I called it The Truth About Real Estate Investing. Yeah. So then that's been always the mission about the show, is to bring on only folks who have repeatable businesses that anyone can apply.
That's awesome. Love that. What'd you say, Rob?
I was saying Erwin should Howard Stern people and just have them on there, people that he thinks are not genuine, and then just grill them.
Erwin's so nice though.
Yeah, I'm not that kind of person.
I thought about doing that a couple of times, to be honest, but I think what I think, you know, we sort of steered towards was just asking more in-depth questions instead that you know, maybe they wouldn't be able to answer if they weren't being sincere.
To Rob's strain, I asked a gentleman who was claiming he was making 6 figures of income. I studied accounting in school, so I know he meant gross income, as in like total rent, not cash flow. But he deliberately was using the term income because he only had 4 properties. There's no way he was generating 6 figures of cash flow.
Erwin,
right?
It's all income until you add the expenses.
And those aren't real. Just don't exclude those things like inflation. You start taking some things out and inflation's not so bad. Just like your cash flow. Sorry, Elizabeth.
That's okay. No, that's fine. I knew this was going to be fun. So how much time do you dedicate each week to your podcast?
To record an episode, it's about 2 hours, and then to prepare show notes around and in the show intro and record show intro is around 2 hours as well. So if I'm and then that may increase as well. But yeah, for now 4 hours a week. I have a whole staff behind the scenes that do a lot of the work for me.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think you need to when you're doing this on a regular basis, right? How does most of your audience find you? Where do you think most people?
Originally, because I was blogging and collecting email addresses, so they all unwillingly got into the podcast. So that's how I got off the ground so quickly. And then after that, I think it's largely organic. I know people share episodes with friends and searching. Show's been pretty well reviewed, so really grateful for that.
That's awesome. And lastly, what is your podcast superpower?
I don't know if I have one. Again, because I'm no different than my listener. I'm curious. I want something as passive as possible. If it's going to be active, I don't know exactly what it is, what the risks are. So I ask all those questions around those things. So actually, Christian said Christian, I'm not gonna try his last name.
Spillfogle?
Christian Spillfogle said the nicest thing last week, that his father, I believe, used to work in radio.
Yeah.
And so these are Christian's terms. I would never say these things myself. The Christian's father said that I was a natural, and the questions I have for my guests, they're not even pre-prepared.
No.
I'm just naturally curious and want to know how things work. And then if I ask the question and they share the answer, then my entire audience understands how things work, so that then they can add that to their own recipe formula to bring themselves financial security, freedom, whatever it means to them.
Yeah.
That's when I get Rob on. So then all of y'all can invest in Costa Rica successfully. Right?
I'm super intrigued. And then to hear that Sarah's looking at stuff down there too, like now I'm super interested. That's awesome. Thank you, Erwin. Okay, so let's go, and we may not have everybody answer every question. It may be we'll sort of hopscotch because it looks like there's quite a few people here this evening. I'm sure people would love the opportunity to ask you some questions themselves as well. So can anybody learn to be a successful podcast host? Do you think this is something that is limited to people with a certain personality type or with a certain skill set, or do you think literally anybody could do it? Sarah?
I mean, I think anybody can do it if they are consistent, right? So a lot of what we see is even just in podcasts in general, is they haven't been recorded or updating them for so long, and then they kind of just fall off. So like lots of people have great ideas and they want to get into something, but that consistency over time and over a long period of time is really how you're going to get your listeners. I think it was maybe at like the 50th episode that like really stuff started for me, really snowballing. And also I would just say, as a podcast host, you really have to listen, because I used to in the beginning prepare my questions. Now I kind of just run with it based on where the conversation's going. And that makes, I think, the best podcast. And so I think whatever, like if you're, shy, you could still do this. If you are outgoing, you can still do this. But ultimately, you just have to be a good listener that's able to be consistent and not have a great idea. And then all of a sudden there's a shiny penny somewhere else and you decide that you don't want to do it anymore and you're going into something else.
I love that. And I wouldn't have thought of that off the top of my head either. Consistency definitely would be key for sure. Thank you. Rob, what about you? What do you think has made you, you're the longest running one on here. You were definitely one of the first, as far as I know, for Canadian real estate.
We just won't go away, I guess. No, I think actually what Sarah said, it makes a lot of sense. If, I don't know, I guess I lost my train of thought there. What's the question again?
Can anybody be a host?
My point to what Sarah said was going to be that you had to listen to what the person was saying, because I used to do. I'm sorry, that's so embarrassing.
That's amazing. I love
that
it.
That is what it was going to be, because when like at first I would have all the questions there too, and I wouldn't let it be a conversation. And yeah, oh my gosh, that is probably the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened on a podcast to me. But yeah, so and then it's not natural, it doesn't flow. And if you're not listening, you can't transition well. And I think transitions are actually pretty important too, rather than just saying, someone answers the question and you go, okay, so next question, So I think that there's if people can sort of learn how to transition well, it's actually pretty important.
Yeah. And I think the transition really shows whether people are listening to you or not as well.
You know what? That's because I'm just really nervous tonight. I was telling Sarah before we started, I'm super nervous, and now I'm even more nervous.
I'm sorry.
You're doing awesome. You're doing awesome.
You're amazing, Rob. This is just like one of your podcasts, because those don't get nervous anymore, do they?
You just have to stand there with your background, and we're all a little bit jealous of the tan and the like actual greenery behind
and
you.
Our new editors don't edit anything out anymore. So when I do stuff like that, before I used to edit my own stuff out. I go, oh man, I sound a little dumb there. I'll take that out. And now we don't do that anymore. So
I love that. Unfiltered. That's amazing. What about you, Erwin? Do you think anybody can be a good podcast host?
I believe all skills can be learned.
I like
and
that.
The thing is, though, not everyone's willing to learn and put in the work. So that's the straight truth, everyone. Even though this is a great medium, a lot of people won't do it. And if people ask me, like, oh, that's so negative. How many people do you know don't invest in real estate? Right?
Yeah.
So same thing. And then I'll share one thing. In the podcast space, the podcast stats are not transparent. As in, like, you can all go look. You won't find Sarah's, mine, or Rob's, how many downloads our shows get. So for anyone to start a podcast and start reaching out and trying to get book guests, you can do that because they have no idea how much of an influencer you are. So you can get guests and not have a listenership. I've seen it done, and that's the truth.
Wow. I didn't even realize that you guys have access to your stats. You would think that would be public information in some way, shape, or form.
I will say though that if we get invited, so here's an example, not that I'm disagreeing with you, but this is a conversation I think it's just interesting to have. I will still look and see like how many reviews they've had, right? So like if they have like 1 or 2 reviews versus if they have 200, you might be able to gauge, not exactly the amount, but like how long they've had the podcast for, and, potentially how, if they have 1 or 2 reviews versus 200, likely the 200 will have a lot more listeners and downloads.
Yeah.
Not everyone's willing to do due diligence.
But also, I guess that only really matters if you're trying to get like the heavy hitters on the show. If I ask my friend who just completed his first burr, to come on and share his story, hopefully he's not going to look up my stats and think that I'm not good enough for him to come and share it, right? Like I think that most people are willing to share regardless of how successful your podcast is, and basing whether or not they're going to come on that. At least that's what I've found.
I agree. You know what? I don't think that, I think one person, I think it was like Ramit Sethi that told me he's too busy, but like everybody else that I've ever asked to be on the show has said yes. And probably like you guys as well, it's their opportunity to share, but like everyone I've asked, the only person that's ever told me no, ironically, it was Alfonso from the Right Club. And now we are co-hosting the podcast together, but he was just really scared originally.
I've had people I've had to bug for a long time to come on.
Yeah.
And finally they do, but.
So what's the reason, do you think?
I think that they're just nervous and they don't feel like they have the right to be on there. But like, and you can explain too that it's not about, again, like as long as my guests are genuine, I know that there's something that people can learn from them, regardless of whether they've only done one deal, let's say, and just sharing their experience. As long as they're not doing one deal and pretending they've done 10. Like that's the important thing, is just that they come on and share their experience.
Mm-hmm. I see that a lot in people in the real estate realm, is this whole imposter syndrome, right? And feeling like, I've only done one deal, or I've only made $50,000. And, I don't know if that makes me a successful investor, or I don't know if, this formula that I followed, if it's repeatable. And there sort of seems to be people sort of in that realm. And then there seems to be people who are like super confident and like super, do you think that that's something that's unique to real estate? Or do you think that it's, do you think that if you were hosting a podcast on like cooking, for example, you'd find people who were the same way? Is that unique to real estate investors?
Well, I couldn't say. I've only done a couple of my cooking show podcasts so far, so I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I would imagine that there's people like that in every kind of thing, just people that want to pump themselves up. And I mean, I understand to a certain aspect, it's more in your mind to sort of fake it till you make it, not pretend that you're somebody that you're not to everybody else. It's more just believing that you can get where you want to get. It's two different things, Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think this is a good time to ask our second question, which is, since you don't see your audience's reaction, how do you know you're going in the right direction with your guests and with your questions and with your format in your podcast? How do you know that, you're hitting the mark? Because especially if you're recording episodes and releasing them slowly over time, how do you know that the content you're releasing is timely and applicable? Erwin, do you want to start with that one?
Generally, I know if I enjoyed the episode, if I enjoyed the interview, I'm pretty sure that someone in the audience will enjoy it.
I love that. You're like literally just so genuine. I love that.
Because I don't know, I know so little. So when I learn things, I'm really excited. And also and then one of the things about my show is it's generally kind of socially conscious. As in, like, for example, I had Addy Invest on the show just recently, and they're trying to socialize real estate investing with fractional real estate. So that's incredibly exciting. And I had Lanescape come on the show. So they're basically architects for laneway housing, right? So they're creating housing supply. That excites me, right?
It's needed in so many cities.
Because you're creating housing supply. Exactly. They're not just straight capitalists, and often people like Lanescapes, they're just geeks. And I say that in the kindest term, because I consider myself a geek. They just want to help people. They're not even so much about the money, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. And again, I know, again, if I enjoy the episode, I usually know in the interview, then I usually know my guest will, and that usually comes out when I'm conversing with a person, right? Like, for example, if I'm struggling with the guest, I imagine that comes out, right? When the guest isn't like, they're just closed off, or they could be nervous, but whatever. And then generally people reach out to me as well. They DM me, they text me, send me messages like, that was so inspiring, right?
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That must feel so good to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, it's cool. It's interesting as well, because I don't check my reviews, because I've had so many hater reviews that I never read my reviews. And then for marketing purposes, I had to check, because I needed to provide the statistics to try for marketing purposes. And I picked up a whole bunch of reviews, and yeah, I had to stop reading. I thought I was gonna cry.
But bad ones or good ones?
Oh, good ones, good ones.
Oh, okay. That's good.
That's awesome. I love that.
This
Good
whole
ones.
pandemic has me way too emotional, so I need to avoid both the bad and the good.
How about you, Sarah? How do you?
I mean, I think that like, just like when we were podcast listeners, and we probably still are podcast listeners, there are going to be some guests that you relate to. There's going to be some guests that you're like, I need to contact these people. And I think it's even just from the guest feedback when they say, hey, I've got like so many messages from your podcast. Like, some people are still getting them months later. People will email, message me on Instagram. Hey, I love this podcast. Like, obviously the reviews, you try to do your best. I mean, obviously I'll tell you, it is not, you don't start a podcast because you're going to make money from the podcast. You've got to do it because you want to, be out there and help others and get others to learn and have the new insights and more knowledge. It's such a small industry. But I think ultimately, even just the feedback from the guests that were on, just saying, hey, thanks so much. Like, so many people have reached out, and, they were asking more questions and whatnot. But I guess you don't really fully know. It's not like YouTube where you've got like a little like thumbs up and, well, that's gone now, and a little thumbs down. But I think ultimately, just that ongoing feedback, I'm sure we all get emails every single week from listeners, messages from listeners and whatnot. And some podcasts will speak to some more than others, right? And if somebody is not interested in a certain strategy or whatnot, maybe they won't connect with that person, but there might be somebody else on the podcast. So I would say, once in a while, you might have a show that is not as good for another listener, but it could be great for somebody in a different situation.
Awesome. Love that. Rob, anything to add, or do you want to tackle our next question?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, you don't really know unless you do get the feedback, but the feedback doesn't, like, it might be someone that just found your show that just decided to write in and say, hey, that's the first one I've heard, and it was actually pretty good. And the downloads don't necessarily do it justice either, just because it might be a topic that someone wants to learn about, which I guess does translate, but the interview might not always be the greatest. It just happens to be a topic that people wanted to learn about. So as far as like which ones were the best, it's really only, I guess, in the emails and things like that I would get from people saying how much they enjoyed a certain episode.
Gotcha. Well, why don't you start off then on our next one as well, talking about how has being a podcast host changed your investing journey? And we can kind of actually combine it, because I'd love to know, if you can think of an episode or a couple of episodes where there were some real nuggets or some real, good information, something that really made you stop and think, something that made you change direction or connected some dots in your head in terms of investing. Did you have any episodes that kind of come to mind like that?
Well, there's a bunch of them, and I see that Quentin, I think, is on here now.
Yeah.
And like Quentin, just meeting Quentin like changed my life, and we've had him on the podcast numerous times. I'd say he's probably the biggest influence that I've ever had as far as any of this goes, and definitely changed the way I did things. Just shared with everyone that you can do it. Like, regardless of where you are now, there's a way that you can get into this. And that, I think, was like the the biggest turning point for me anyways, by far.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. So were you sort of feeling, a little bit unsure previously, or was it that Quentin did a really good job? Because I find that as a former educator, Quentin does a great job of taking something complicated and breaking it down into its smaller pieces.
Yeah, I think it's like a couple of things. So when I first started, I wanted to do wholesaling, but like I said, there was really not too much Canadian content telling you that you could actually do this kind of thing. You don't know whether you're going to get in trouble, this and that. And then, just going and networking with Quentin and learning more about it, realizing that, hey, I can do this. And and it was the lowest barrier of entry for me, at the time. So just the education piece, being able to, be told that you can do it.
Awesome. Absolutely. All right. How about you, Sarah? Tell us about a couple of your episodes or a guest or something that really, changed how you looked at real estate investing.
I mean, so I guess there's probably, like, if I had to pick one guest, it would probably be my mentor, who I'm doing the resort development and a few other things with, Harry James, who I reached out on Instagram. I'm like, hey, you've got some cool stuff. Like, let's have you on my podcast. And then from there, we kept talking, and now we're doing business together, which is really cool. But I think aside from that, it is, a privilege to be able to speak to so many great minds and different investors that, you have, in a sense, like 30 minutes with them, and you can ask them whatever you want, which is awesome. But on top of that, you've now built the connection, and if you your network is your net worth, right, at the end of the day. And so we become friends with people over time from the podcast. You get to know them as well, and you can potentially do coffee outside of this as well. You've got connections across Canada. If you go to the BC or Alberta, you've got probably somebody from the podcast that you can say, hey, let's grab a drink. So I think for that part, it's just really cool to be able to expand your network more so than maybe just the meetups that you would go to in person. And you can do it coast to coast and even in the US. And there's some great people. I've had American investors that had great insights, and I'm like, I've got to stay in touch with them. They have such a great story. I love their energy. And you can develop, friendships and, potentially do deals with people like in this case with Harry James. Now we're working on a really cool cottage resort, and it was all from noticing his Instagram, and he was doing these like little videos, motivational videos. I'm like, you've got to be on the show. And sometimes that's, and we're not doing it for that per se, but at some point you'll meet somebody that, in Rob's case with Quentin, that will change your life and give you a whole, new direction.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love hearing that someone you had on your show later became someone that you're investing with. I'd love to hear more about your cottage offline afterwards, your cottage deal.
Sure.
Erwin, what about you? Oh, you're muted. You guys are so well behaved.
Double embarrassing. I had to ask us the question again.
Okay, so it was, how has being a podcast host changed your investment journey? And then that kind of loops in with, what is your biggest learning from a podcast guest?
How it's changed my journey is that because I do it weekly, I'm generally speaking to quite inspiring people. So for free, I'm getting inspired. So that alone, I think you can all appreciate, like you guys and everyone else on the show and listening in, to be inspired for like 2 hours each week. That's a gift, and it costs me doesn't cost me nothing, but it's a great return. How's that? So that's and then just picking up so many best practices. And again, the show is called about the truth about real estate investing, and I love the fact that I can shine a light on people who are excellent, right? Like let's talk about Quentin, right? Again, the show is about trying to take the spotlight away from the shysters out there, and then put someone in front of an audience and say, like, and then show them the Quentin, right? And then people ask me all the time about coaching referrals. So I send them to Quentin. I send them to yourself, Elizabeth, right? You guys are OGs, right? You know what I mean? And and I had Rob purposely picked up Rob to come on my podcast because his podcast is bigger than mine. And I wanted people to know, if you're going to learn how to do a podcast, start with Rob, right? So yeah, it's just like that. That's what I enjoyed. That's what I really enjoyed, right? Awesome. Again, shining a light on people that that deserve a spotlight.
Did you just come up with another nickname there? Because I thought I heard you call him the Quentin.
No, I
Is that
call him
gonna-
Q in private.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that none of you mentioned, but I think it's so apparent is how much you guys give back to the community with your podcasts. In terms of, there's a lot of people I talk to in my discovery calls as a coach, and they're coming to me and they're telling me that they've consumed all this content and this information from you guys, and they have so much. They're going, I'm so excited. Like, I know all this stuff, and now I just need help to create my plan so I can take all this valuable information and make it translate into my journey in real estate. And I think that that's amazing, because you guys are literally putting so much valuable content out there that people are becoming excited and they're becoming motivated, and you're prompting them to take action and to invest. And I think, you look at the state of the economy right now, you look at the inflation, you look at the real estate market, and you go, if we can find somewhere to park our money, if we can find a way to partner or invest and be able to protect ourselves from some of the stuff that's going on out there, then we're really building, a legacy, not just for ourselves, but for our children and for our future, right? So I think that's awesome. All right.
And can I just jump in there?
Of course.
So I can't leave out Sarah. And when I invited Sarah on my podcast, I deliberately wanted someone who is young and kicking ass, because there's all these young people out there who think they can't do this, right? So here's Sarah. She has a day job. She got all these properties. Please tell me again why you can't do this, right?
Yeah.
Because again, we all know lots of people who don't invest at all, right? I'm too busy, right? I'm not old enough and haven't made enough money already. Well, there's Sarah. She bought 6 properties already in like 2 years, right? It's totally possible.
I find people use the same excuses. Like, if people are saying, I don't have enough time to invest in real estate, they're saying, I don't have enough time generally for a lot of other things in their life. Like, that's just their go-to reason for not doing something. And it doesn't matter what it is. So then the question that they need to ask themselves is, what do I need to change in order for me to move forward? Because we all sort of have these little scripts and these things we tell ourselves that give us permission not to take action. But I think you guys are putting so much information out there that we really have to revisit what the excuse is and then just remove it.
And that's why I share our story. Like, Sarah, like the Toronto Star article, how old were you at that point?
I'm 37 now. I was 33 then.
Right. So here's a living example of a 33-year-old already owns 6 investment properties. What more social proof do you need to get off your ass and get going? Right.
You know what's funny though, and like you guys might have seen it or got some of it as well. But when you're on a podcast and you're doing a podcast, I think that the listeners will they will be happy, they will be motivated. But as soon as you go on like a publication like Toronto Life, and I was just reading something today, the Toronto Star, you'll get a mix, but there's a lot of hate. There's a lot of hate out there because you're now going to the public very close-minded. And so there's like, I'm a slumlord. I got, like whatever, like I grew up with a silver spoon, like just like anything. Right. And so, but it's interesting because this medium of podcasting, we don't get that. Right. Because I think the people that will listen want to be better. They want to, create something with their lives and do something different. And it's so funny when you look at the other side and you get all the hate, which is totally cool, but it was very interesting. And so, it's just how life is, I suppose.
That's an interesting thing to think about, because I think a lot of people might sort of aspire to, having, an article or something like that written about them. But I think in the world of real estate investing, when we do move in kind of these circles, like you said, we're much more insulated. Like I've seen you put yourself out there in some of like the Facebook groups for landlords and stuff. And we are, not really well liked by a lot of people. So it's somewhat comforting to be in an environment or to establish an environment where it is conducive to learning and sharing ideas and to leveling up and to growing ourselves and our businesses. And I think there's a lot to be said for the real estate investing community, that we support and encourage each other so much. I find that there's a lot of people who will share, in one-on-one situations, they'll share feedback and thoughts and ideas and help other investors grow. I don't find that it's highly competitive the way some other industries are and the way some other people are.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So what are you, let's see, what do you know now that you wish you had known when you started investing? Rob, do you want to start with that one?
Sucker.
What do I know now? See, I wrote answers down for all these, and now I just got to scroll through and find it.
Do you want us to come back to you?
I guess the big thing probably is to stay true to the mission statement. We set out to give relevant information to Canadians, and I think that there's been a lot of different things coming at us. We're talking about you're talking about podcasting, right? Like you want the answer for podcasting. Is that correct?
Well, no, like you started your investing journey like 8 years ago or whatever. So what do you know now as a real estate investor? I mean, being able to talk.
I don't even know where to start on that. I mean, I know everything I know now is more than I knew then.
Would you
I mean, the big one, of course, is nothing ever gets done, I guess, unless you take action, right? Like that's the one that, and it's so true, but everyone says it. And it's something that I guess apparently, you know, no matter how many times a lot of people hear it, they need to hear it from another person or another person apparently before they're going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So people, that's the biggest one, I guess.
Yeah.
Take action.
I like that. And mine, I mean, I'm not a podcast host, but I think one of the things that I've learned in my journey is that you have to craft your roadmap. I think a lot of us as real estate investors, stuff kind of happens and we kind of fall into things. And then because we're entrepreneurs and we have this positive mindset, we find a way to take it and make it an opportunity and to excel. But I think there's something to be said too for setting a bit of an intention and having a bit of a roadmap in terms of, you know, this is what I want my plan to be. And, you know, we always underestimate what we can do in a finite period of time. So it's important to have goals and then to have stretch goals too, I think, when we think about, you know, how many deals we want to do in the next year or how many strategies we want to learn or how much money we'd like to bring in for our household. Sarah?
Can I add to that before you move on though?
Yeah, sure.
So when we decided to move to Costa Rica, we did it pretty quickly, although we were like trying to figure out somewhere warm where that was conducive with still running our businesses and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I would get, so we decided we were going to do this. We were going to come here. We were going to flip houses. I saw other people doing it, knew it could be done, but I would get hit. And so I kind of put the blinders on at that point and said, I'm just going to go and do that. Because almost too much learning can sort of dissuade you in the wrong direction. People were asking me things like, well, what about capital gains tax? Like, what are the implications of the capital gains tax? I said, I don't know. Whatever they are, you know, like I'm going to, like my deal has so much meat on the bone that even if it's 50%, I don't care. It's 15%. But, you know, at the time when people are asking me all these questions, I'm just like, I don't want anything to dissuade me from going and doing this thing. So, yeah. So you know, I think that's really important too. Like, obviously the goals and you know, that is like super important. But I think if you've got like a passion, a dream, and something you want to do, it's almost a good idea to put the blinders on and just dive in and figure it out. Like Sarah said, you know, whatever it is.
Ready, fire, aim.
Fire. Yeah, ready, fire, aim. Exactly.
I love that you shared that, Rob, too, because most people would think, okay, someone, you know, over a decade of experience as an investor like Rob has, like, you must be very calculated about it. But, and you're talking about putting the blinders on, but spinning it around and looking at it positively, what you're talking about is focus. And what
you can't learn everything though, too. Like, that's just it. Like, so I would get certain questions that I didn't know the answers to. And instead, like, I know I would eventually, I will know the answer, right? Like, there's no way I can't learn it. At some point I will know, but it'll be too late for me to change my mind, you know. And so
there's something to be said for having the confidence to just, no matter what happens on my journey, I'm going to figure it out. I've got the right people around me. I know how to ask questions. I'm a problem solver, and I'll figure it out. I don't need to wait for all the stars to align into a perfect, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
That was
exactly.
great. I love that, Rob. What about you, Sarah?
So maybe I'll answer it just from a podcasting perspective. I think when I first started my podcast, I did not have a power team. I barely, I think I was probably still going to TD Bank to get my first couple mortgages at that point in time. And over time, when you're interviewing some people, you're like, wow, like this person is a great mortgage broker. This person is a great lawyer. Like we've got to have them, as part of the power team. And I think you start building that way and the importance of team. But the other thing that I think I learned along the way is, as we're interviewing a lot of people that are so much bigger in terms of, being further ahead, doing different strategies, you can actually think larger, you think bigger, you have more confidence, other people that are doing it. Before I started and before I started going to even like networking events, I did not know a whole lot of Canadian real estate investors. I thought it was like an American thing, and it was different there with the financing because it's a lot less upfront and all that good stuff. And I think as I started anyways interviewing Canadians that were years ahead of me, I'm like, this is possible. And originally I had a goal of like 10 properties because I think that's just what was in my head. And there's people that were past that and retired, and I'm like, I want to retire. I don't want to work forever, And so I think it creates that realm of what's possible by actually being able to interview somebody that has done it or has the dream that you want for yourself.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think you guys are probably more inspiring for Canadian real estate investors than you realize. I think you guys have had a bigger impact on people's journey than you probably realize. What about you, Erwin? What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you got started?
I wish I titled my podcast the Breakthrough Podcast in 2012. Yeah, start sooner.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's thinking like, you're thinking the same thing I did when I started my podcast, for example, like, oh, Rob Brake, he's already out there. He's already dominating the whole space. There's no room for me. Right. And now I'm sure people on this listening are on this are thinking, oh, there's no space left. Like Rob is there. Sarah's there. Quentin started a podcast. Rockstar has our podcast. There's all the other ones. There's no space for me. Right. That ain't true because the whole podcast space is growing. It continues to grow. A lot of people don't want to pay for media. So that's where podcasts fit in. Not everyone's Joe Rogan. So and where I can't even think of another podcast that you have to pay for. So yeah, start early, start often. Consistency and frequency is more important than anything else. Anyone who tells you need different, you don't need much to get started. From an investing standpoint, I would say have good conversations, like good long conversations with a couple investors who have the same values as you to determine what kind of investing you want to do. Right. I know we're talking about podcasting tonight, but if you look at the panelists on tonight, we have completely different investing strategies, each of us.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to be like Elizabeth, book her for a long, lengthy call and get all the details and see if that's what you want. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing with Sarah. Like, understand her tenant profile, her strategy, like what development is, like how often does she have to go see the site, all those sorts of things. See if that aligns with your values and how you want to spend your time. So I think I'm the least active as an investor in this group because I'm at an age and my portfolio is at a point where I'm not trying to grow it as aggressively. So again, like there's no right or wrong between how anyone's investing. It's what's right for you and what are you going to actually do, right? Like Sarah, I know you've been working out like crazy. Rob is looking jacked. He probably does beach workouts and stuff. Elizabeth and you doing the 800-day hard or whatever it's called. Like whatever works for you is better than whatever you don't do. So if gardening is your workout, It's better than not doing anything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I like that because it gives us so much space to be ourselves and to, have our own journey and to, fill our days with the things that are most important and matter most to us. Like Sarah, you don't have kids either, right? No. So you and I were among very few real estate investors that we don't have kids. So we have, in proportion to people who have kids, we tend to have a little more time. So the question becomes, how do we want to spend that time? And, we aren't, super focused on, I want this legacy and, I'm doing this for my kids and I've got education to pay for. Like our goals are different and there's nothing wrong with that. Like we can have our goals that we want to achieve and our timelines that we want to achieve it in. And they can be completely different. I think just about all of my other investor friends all have kids and they're super focused on that. And, as someone who doesn't have kids, our goals are different. We have, a little more freedom to decide what our evenings and weekends and everything else looks like as well.
And I'll just add to that, that whole saying that if you do what you love, you'll never work another day in your life.
Yeah.
There's a good chance those people don't make the same kind of money as like Sarah Larby or Rob Breaker or Elizabeth Kelly. Right. So I'll say that as well.
One of the things that I've really learned on this journey is that you need to work hard and you need to be dedicated, but you can't do it at the expense of your health. You have to make sure that as hard as you're working and as long as your days are, that you are continuing to put time aside for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. You can't sacrifice all of that with the idea that you're going to, retire in 5 years or you're going to have X amount of income, because we never really know what's going to happen with our health. So we have to make sure that that is something that we preserve and take care of all the way along in our journey, no matter how hard we're working. I think that
in relationships and friendships and, everything because memories, experiences, those are all the important pieces at the end. It's not about, the money, because the money helps, of course, but it's, if you have completely pushed everything else to the side, you're going to have nothing left when you're at your goal, financially.
Agreed. Like, I don't want it to say Rob Break worked very hard and that's it. Like, is definitely not about that for me. And I think it does. And we were talking about this with a guest the other day too. It's like, sometimes can be very hard to tell yourself that you need to slow back down, like once you get into a groove, once you, like, I almost like, I'm addicted to work a lot of times, especially if I think there's somebody there that needs my help. I will work and I'll answer the phone at 11 o'clock at night because it's that person that I feel like they need my help, which is like ridiculous, So there's a lot of life balance that really you've got to drive into your own head, because or your wife can do it for you. But one way or another, you have to figure it out, the balance.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm interested to hear, before we go to the questions from the audience, I would like to hear what you're planning for 2022. What do you got going on? What are you envisioning for your next step in your journey?
I'll go first then. As far as the podcast goes, we are actually sort of, okay, like our podcast has been almost 100% organic, just with the people that we've had on sharing it and the reviews helping, people discover it. So now we're actually taking a different approach where we've hired a marketing company and we're going to try to turn it into a little bit of a business now. So I am kind of excited in a way, but also, trying to stay very conscious of the fact that we don't want to lose sight on that focus that we've had right from the beginning that's gotten us where we are. So I think that we're in store for some exciting changes, possibly some higher profile guests and that kind of thing, which I'm excited about. My goal is to maybe hear from some people that you would know of, but not necessarily know that they were involved in real estate investing. So that's kind of something that I would like to focus on a little bit more and hear, hey, like that person who I know their name from wherever it is, I had no idea that they had an interest in real estate investing and hear their stories. So that's sort of a goal that we have for the podcast going forward now. And we're doing a bunch of rebranding and we're doing a bunch of new marketing. And I am kind of like, I feel like the old man who's just like, don't build that high rise in my neighborhood, where, you know, I really, really want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what it is in our, you know, journey to try and make it better. So we'll see. I think that we, Sandy and I, sort of our vision aligns. So I think it'll be okay, but people can look forward to that anyways.
That's awesome. We will look forward to it too. Sarah, what about you? What do you got planned?
Well, I don't do any podcasting from May to September, so I'm going to enjoy the summer. But no, aside from that, you know, I batch record my podcast quite a bit in advance. So, I mean, right now, I think I'm recorded into March, and I'll probably record up until, you know, right before May, and have enough hopefully to get me to about mid-September, early October. But I'm actually in talks to set up a YouTube show. So like taking the podcast, but making it more of a show, figuring out how to include the resorts. We're going to theme the resort. So like, I'm going to have some fun with that. You know, I love the podcast. I think I have it in a spot right now where I've got 2 VAs in the Philippines. They're like $5 US an hour. They do a lot of my stuff. And then I have Paul, who does all of my branding and my marketing. So like, you know, I have it kind of like rolling, I think, well, where I can keep doing that and then potentially add like a YouTube show and figure out how I can create a fun little game around theming the cottages and all that stuff with the resort. So, you know, I don't know if like, I think I'm just going to keep interviewing awesome guests on the show. I don't think, you know, right now I want to change how the podcast is going. I think it's going well. And what else can I add for fun? And I think the YouTube show is going to come into play at some point.
Oh, that's fantastic. That'll be awesome. I'm definitely going to sign up and watch that. I want to hear all about your cottages. Erwin, what about you? What do you got planned?
More the same. One thing that we're changing up is that I'll probably be sharing more of what I'm learning. So one thing I've tried to do is not have the podcast take over too much of my time, but it's an investment we're willing to make for next year. For example, I'm researching Ethereum staking, right? I'm actually having a gentleman on the show who was into Ethereum very, 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 very early, like probably the second investor, maybe the 8th investor, somewhere early. Anyways, again, whatever I'm consuming, I'll probably do some videos on it, and they'll also be shared in the podcast. So it'll be across all the social media platforms, YouTube, podcast, shared on Facebook probably. And then the big thing is we're bringing back the Wealth Hacker Conference for 2020, so November 12th, 2022.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Do you know who your keynote guest is yet?
Yeah, we signed them about a month ago. So that was a big relief. But yeah, we haven't announced anything yet, so I don't want to announce it yet.
Right here. Come on, Erwin.
Liz, I think I told you in private already. But yeah, we're not releasing it yet. No.
Well, I'm not going to repeat what you've told me in private.
Give us the initials.
Yeah, you guys won't even know who it is. We picked someone a bit on the lifestyle. Someone who's kind of like who hustled their butt off and risked so much, and now has so much, and they have a good number of kids, so it's kind of just interesting to see how what their life is like, and what kind of resume they want for their life. You know, like Rob Brake, the hardworking guy. Like that's not what you want in Tombstone. You want, you know, epic father, right? Life-changing entrepreneur, made 300 multimillionaires, right? Stuff like that, right? What ran 5 ultra marathons. I don't know, whatever it is. Swam coast to coast, Costa Rica. I don't even know if that's possible.
Coast to coast. That'd be kind of hard. Yeah.
Whatever though. But yeah, it's something a little bit off the board. A lot of people won't be familiar, but once they get into it, they'll be impressed. Because I'm impressed.
That's awesome.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-oh. My internet's breaking up.
Well, it's for both of you actually, because I wanted to know, like, I think one of the things that has helped our podcast is that we try to stay timeless. We try not to focus so much on exactly where a market is right now, and more on in a general sense of information that people can use. Is that what you guys do too?
Yeah, I mean, I have tried to keep it evergreen as much as possible. Like once in a while, like if there's something big, what I'll do is I'll record it and then I'll have the virtual assistants push that forward to release it in a timely fashion. Like when everything was happening with the pandemic, I think I had like a couple like episodes that I did there in the beginning. You know, but mostly it's evergreen, because if somebody wants to go back in 2 years from now, or, you know, or go back in 2 years or go back a year, you know, there's still lots of great content from there. So I do try not to make it super timely. And also because I batch them. And so when they release, like it could be 6 months from now, it could be 4 months from now.
Yeah. Erwin?
It's a bit of a mix because, like, for example, I'll ask a guest like about their first investment property and then their most recent investment property. So when you talk about the most recent, when you talk about numbers and they say they bought a Brantford semi for 320K, right? And they listen to it 5 years later, that's not useful information. So I don't think about it too much that way. I am always pushing guests for like what is the latest news, because I don't even know, but well, based on how we distribute the podcast, they're getting it as soon as it's released, right? And they're likely listening to it then versus going back in time and searching, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know now about your formats, are you guys glad that you do podcasts versus writing a book or having a YouTube channel? Because I get the sense that YouTube is more like up to the minute information, and podcasts, like you guys were saying, it's sort of an evergreen, and you're trying to find the right balance between, you know, content that's applicable now versus, you know, what is happening right up to the minute in real estate. Are you glad that you started doing podcasts? Do you think there's a book in your future? I mean, obviously, Sarah, you're heading into the YouTube world, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you have a good guest, you don't really have to work that hard. You've got the questions in front of you, and it's pretty easy. Yeah, you know, sometimes you got to work a little harder than others and pry answers and sort of guide a conversation more than you have to with other people. But you know, it's not that hard. I would tell anyone thinking that it's hard, it's not really that hard. And we do a video one now, so now you have to sort of be conscious of what you're doing in front of the camera. You don't want to be picking your nose or anything like that. Where with an audio podcast, you know, you can wear whatever you want. You can get up and walk around or whatever. But all in all, I think that, I mean, it's pretty easy. So for someone to say that, you know, they can't do it is certainly not accurate in most people's circumstances. So yeah, I don't know. I would pick this. It's like we've got so much content out there, and how much of it is actually coming from me? It's really not much. I mean, I don't even know really what we get a credit for. That's almost like the imposter syndrome thing there. I'm not really doing a whole lot. I'm asking people questions and they're answering them, you know? So this is definitely way easier than any of those other things.
And I will say, like a podcast, if you think of all the mediums, right? I mean, our attention spans, especially probably post-pandemic, is so short, right? You're like watching a video, you go to the next video, you're, you know, watching TV, you're flipping onto something else, or you're like on your phone. I think the difference with a podcast is like, if people are listening to it on their drive to work, or that while they're like, I don't know, maybe just like on a walk or something along those lines, like the attention span and the amount of time that they actually spend listening to it. And there was some research, I'd have to pull it up exactly where it came from, but it was longer. People spent longer listening to podcasts than other mediums like YouTube and other things like that. So, you know, again, and it makes sense, right? Like when I'm sure we've all listened to podcasts ourselves. on the drive. You know, if you've got an hour drive, you're probably listening to the podcast and you're not flipping around to the next one, because you should be driving and your eyes on the road. So I think like from that perspective, you know, that's why I think that people will listen to us maybe longer than other mediums.
So you don't foresee podcasts going anywhere anytime soon?
I mean, I don't think so. I'm sure something else that's going to be more awesome is going to come at some point. I mean, that's just technology when we evolve. But I like Rob said, it's fairly easy to do. You just have to do it and you have to be consistent. And then, you know, if you don't want to be doing all the editing and all that stuff, you just got to hire the right people to do it for you. And there's a low cost of that, but you know, I don't think it's going anywhere tomorrow. I think people still enjoy that. I mean, Audible is a new thing, fairly new. But I don't think people are going to say no more podcasts. I'm just going to YouTube moving forward. I could be wrong, but you know, unless something brand new and some new technology comes, I think podcasts are probably here to stay for a little while longer.
Yeah, it looked like for a while there, like Clubhouse was going to take over, and then it just dropped off a cliff.
Yeah.
It came and went in what, a year and a half, less than? That's interesting. What about you, Erwin?
If you want to educate folks, then they have to listen for a period of time. Like, you know, no different when you went to school or when you read a book. If you just read the introduction, like the preface, you're not going to learn much.
Mm-hmm.
But the podcast, my experience has been people listened a lot. Versus anyone who has a YouTube channel, like they'll tell you, I think the average watch time is, if they have an average watch time over 3 minutes, that's pretty good. 3 minutes. How much can one absorb in 3 minutes? Right?
Yeah, my kids get bored of videos in like, not kidding, 3 seconds. And it doesn't grab them in like 3 seconds. They're just like, next one. Yeah.
So if you want to educate and influence someone and provide them content, then a longer format's required. And I didn't mention it earlier, but I modeled my podcast off of Tim Ferriss originally, and his formats are long.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I do long format. If
I'm
anyone remembers
I'm
my
not
early
doing
episodes,
I'm not doing a 4-hour podcast with you.
I don't think anyone would spend that time with me. Like, Sarah, you want to do a 4-hour podcast?
Middle
of
July.
A lot of wine.
I've been listening to some of Joe Rogan's podcasts, and I'm literally like, they're topping the 3-hour mark. And I'm like, how have you not like taken a break, like gone to the bathroom, get a glass of water? Like, how are you still talking continuously for 3 hours?
I think Tim Ferriss has those ones too, doesn't he, Erwin? Like 4-hour long podcasts.
But do we actually know that they don't take a break in between? Because they could like piece it back together, like editing. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Like I'm sure they take a break at some point, even just, you know, for a drink or something. Bathroom break.
Absolutely.
Can I answer a question?
Yeah, in the Q&A box, that's where which one would you like to answer?
Pam's asking, how do we find our guests?
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay, so the way that I find guests is actually just in the circles that we run in. And some people that we've had on the show, like Corey McKinnon has been really good at this. He'll just message me and say, I met this really interesting guy. You should have him on the podcast. And other people have done that too. And other than that, like, and we find great guests that way. And other than that, I mean, a lot of times the people that are on the podcast, you wouldn't know it because I don't like, you know, because usually I will have like a realtor client relationship with them, but you know, we don't talk about that kind of thing. It's more just like their story, and because we run into such interesting people that way. So a lot of them I meet just in the circles, in the investing circles. And they don't have to be, like I said, like your guest. I think as long as they have a willingness to share, they can be good. They don't have to have a lot of experience. That's my answer.
To Rob's point, my number one downloaded episode last year was Joel Arndt.
Who's your
Anyone here know Joel Arndt?
Yeah.
Elizabeth does, because you met him because you taught him stuff. But you know, Joel Arndt made, I don't know, I forget the number, almost 40% cash from cash return stock hacking in 2020. And then again, nobody knew who he was, but he was the number one downloaded episode. Like dude's like, doesn't even own any real estate. So yeah, again, you never know what's going to happen. Who's gonna outdraw.
Now, is that because of your marketing? Is that because of your title for the show? Something like that? Like, is it more searchable?
Or his marketing, maybe. Like, did he do a lot of marketing on his end? No.
No, if you go to his Instagram, I don't even think he has 500 followers.
That's really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, naming the show matters a lot.
Yeah,
ability
like,
to name shows.
we did a panel show a couple years ago where we talked to 3 different couples about their first BFRR or BRRR project. And that was our number 1 downloaded episode, like, of all time, I think, actually. Still, we used to, Erwin, like, I don't even know how to find my statistics. Sandy sent me some today, but they used to be right on our website. If you went to our website, you could see across all the platforms how many downloads there was on each episode. And now we've got different hosting, so that's gone. But that was like the only way that I knew how to do it. So I actually don't even know the answers to like how many downloads we have and all that kind of stuff in general.
How important do you think it is to investing money? Like, if people wanted to be a guest on your show, what is the minimum that they could or should be doing in order to have high enough quality equipment for it to come across well? Like, I'm assuming the $5 headphones from the dollar store are not the best, sound quality, or when you're looking
But
at.
you know what those guys have on their ears, right? I mean, I have a mic, which costs maybe $100.
Mhm.
And a laptop, but like, you really don't need anything fancy. You just need a good internet connection, and then like probably just the Apple iPhone, whatever these guys are wearing. That's good enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
ultimately, and you just don't want to have any background noise, right, and that kind of stuff. But you really don't need that much. Like, really, ultimately, maybe $100. Like, don't go out and buy all this fancy stuff. Like, even just as a host, if you're going to do it, like, you likely can start with even just those Apple earphones.
That's good to know, because a lot of people put a lot of money into equipment.
Mm-hmm.
As a guest,
Well,
the headphones that came with your cell phone, that's sufficient.
Yeah. But even if you're going to get started, like for me, I think done is better than perfect. And
exactly.
just start. And then over time, you'll, be able to like maybe spend a little bit more, get a little bit better of equipment. But like, I'm still just running with this $100 mic. And I don't like, and exactly. And it's just easy, because then if I'm at the cottage, I just bring my mic and I have some lights, and I invested in a couple lights, but like, really ultimately, like, it shouldn't cost you a fortune. Don't get the very best mic. Like, do some podcasts first, release them, keep going, make sure that you're going to be consistent with it. And then down the road, you can buy a little bit nicer mic if you want, but really ultimately you can do this on a budget.
Love that. Yeah, that's great.
The number 1 complaint that I have in our reviews is that our show sound quality is terrible. Like, everyone says it. We have really bad sound quality on our show. And when I was doing the editing, I used to run everything through, like, there was an equalizer program that's free. I think you could do like 4 hours a month or something like that on it, which was perfect for us because we do every other week. So that was great. I didn't have to pay for it. You just shoved it in there and it equalized all the sound. And then, like, so Sandy wasn't like way louder than me when he was talking. But now, I mean, I think we should definitely put more focus on that. I'm not saying ignore it, but I mean, we really have put very, very, very little focus on that. And it's more been about who we talk to and what we're talking about. So, that should be the last thing on anybody's list if they want to do something like this.
And I think from a monthly standpoint, like, you do have to have like a hosting place. Like, I use Blueberry. I think it's maybe like, I don't know, $20 a month or something. And there's like probably a couple other programs that you might need, and there's different ones out there. I mean, maybe it'll cost $50. And then if you want to hire somebody from Fiverr to edit it if you want, or I mean, even just like the artwork, the title, like there might be a little bit of upfront cost. Like, you can get a lot of stuff. Like, I think I used Fiverr for the picture, Fiverr for my like little music intro thing. And then you can hire like VAs to even just edit for you. Like in the beginning, when mine was not consistent at all, like I would release one every, 30 or 40 days, just randomly. Like I don't suggest that you do that. You should be a little bit better prepared. But ultimately I made it work. And, I think once you do something weekly or more often, you're going to get more traction. But, you could hire somebody for $5 an hour that can do the editing for you instead of you spending hours and hours putting it together. And to be honest, like, I don't necessarily like the sound of my own voice. And I know that I say, a lot or and it would drive me crazy because I would just try to cut them all out. It's just easier to just hire somebody, they just do it. And then it just happens to just be up and running. And then I'm a master delegator. If I can delegate something, I will. And, those podcast editing, days are long behind me, thank God. Because it was definitely a long, long time to go through all of those.
I think there's a lot in there, Sarah, in what you said that's applicable for us as investors as well. It's sort of the whole who, not how concept, right? When we surround ourselves with the people who are good at doing the things that we're not as good at or not as interested in, then all of a sudden our pace picks up, because we are no longer the bottleneck in moving forward. And I think for us as real estate investors, that's important to remember as well, that if we have an aspect of growing our portfolio that is not our strong suit, then surround ourselves with the right people and the information that we need and the decisions that have to happen. It becomes easier and easier to make them because there's less and less barriers to entry. So it helps us move forward more quickly. Okay, last question, Erwin. I can see you're typing an answer for the first one, so that's awesome. Someone had asked if you have a specific theme or topic. Do you use a planned format or just a loose outline and kind of see where the conversation goes? And then once you guys answer that, then we'll wrap up for the evening. And if anybody wants to stay and chat for a few minutes after, I'll end the recording and we can do that. Sarah, do you want to start with that one?
I mean, ultimately, in terms of format, it's usually based on the conversation. Like I usually will have just an idea of like their strategy or what they might want to share. But sometimes it's just like I go in almost blind, and that's just how the conversation goes. And depending on, some people will send me some questions ahead of time. If they don't, I'm like, is there any specific areas that you want to make sure that we cover at some point during the interview? And sometimes they're like, hey, let's just make sure that we cover this last deal I did, or something along those lines. And that's usually how it is. But here's the thing is, like, these podcasts, don't get scared by like how much you have to plan and that kind of stuff. Like, listen to them, bring on some guests that are willing to share and provide some good insight, not sell stuff, because people will see right through that. But I think if they're genuine, they're willing to share, don't let the whole podcast thing scare you, because otherwise you just won't get started. It's really not that complicated. Literally press record on Zoom. I use Zoom to do mine, and then just save the episode. Then you can upload it and your VAs can do everything else. But if I spent hours and hours and hours preparing questions, like I probably wouldn't be doing it still today. I want this to be like a nice quick thing. Let's, have a great conversation. And then I want to be able to pass that on and have people put it together.
Awesome.
So.
Thank you. Rob, what about you? Do you do a lot of prep? I know Erwin's is fairly informal and relaxed. You have a few questions, but you sort of build on whatever the answers are for the first one. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I'll usually spend about an hour putting together like an outline based on, if somebody's coming on, I'll ask them like, what kind of things do they want to share? Because I want to make sure that I get to those things and not just like arbitrarily ask them questions that I've come up with when I might miss something very valuable that they have to share. Mm-hmm. So I will usually ask them, what is important to them to be able to talk about, right? And then based on that, I will write an outline. I always say before we start, look, we can come back to these at any point, but if we go off, and start talking about other things, don't worry about this at all, and sometimes we'll cut out half of the questions and we just won't get to them. And other times, we'll kind of stick to what's written in the outline. But in general, I do spend about an hour putting together the outline for each one.
Awesome. That's good. Erwin, you got it. The last word.
I often know my guest. Many of my guests know personally, so I usually take like no preparation. It's more like I get the calendar alert. You have a guest in 15 minutes. When it gets down to about 10 minutes, I'll whip out a notebook and I'll write down 4 bullet points. And then before we start recording with my guests, I'll ask, is there anything you want to cover? Right. And then my opening question always is, what's keeping you busy these days? So there's my guest's opportunity to spend some time on whatever that's keeping them busy. Like if I ask Sarah, for example, she'll probably talk about her cottage developments. So you better believe our conversations go and talk about cottage development. Right. And also when I invite a guest on, I usually have an agenda, as in like, I usually have like, oh, how is commercial real estate in Calgary going right now? So I'll go reach out to Shane Melanson, right? I'm always very, I always try to reach out to who is like really legit in that space, and I always get to speak to them. But I also have a completely open mind. So I have an Edmonton oil bull coming on my show in a few weeks, right? We're on complete opposite ends of where we think oil's going to be. But again, I want to hear it because, don't pull any punches for my sake. I could very well be wrong about where oil's going to be. So let you tell me. So yeah, I do very little prep, but that's why I'm really picky on who comes to the show. Yeah, and again, like you asked earlier question, where do you get your guests? I usually have a question in my head, and then I'll go seeking out who has the best answer. Like, so for example, I want to learn more about crypto and specifically Ethereum. I'm going back to someone who's like, a first 10 investor to come on the show, right? So.
Love that. And I love that you have a signature opening. I think that's a really neat idea to ask to have the continuity from one podcast to the next to ask the same question.
I think I actually got that from the gentleman who founded Mastermind Talks. Jason, please help me, folks. Anyone online? Everyone familiar with Mastermind Talks? Guys from Toronto. He was the last guy to bring Tim Ferriss to Toronto.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll find it in about 3 seconds. So let me.
Jason Gaynard. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let me flip back over to the slides for a minute just to wrap up for this evening, and then we'll pop back. So I'd like to thank everyone so much for attending our webinar this evening. This was so much fun. This was something a little bit different and outside the norm because it wasn't specifically focused on real estate, but hopefully everyone learned some real gems if you're thinking about starting your own podcast, or potentially if you would like to be a guest on somebody's podcast and, sort of learn a little bit about the inner workings so you can help to prepare yourself. Normally at this point in the webinar, we would be doing a giveaway. Usually it is a book that I feel would be beneficial for new investors. This month, in light of the upcoming holidays, Erwin is a very kind and generous philanthropist, and he has a charity called the Hamilton Basket Brigade. So we have made a donation to Erwin's charity in support of the children in the Hamilton area. Erwin's specific focus this year is on providing boots for children who are so in need and walking to school in the snow without proper footwear. Erwin, did you want to say a couple of words about the Basket Brigade and what you're up to this year?
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Very kind of you, very generous. I'm sure the kids will appreciate it. The charity is much like what all of you are doing for real estate investing. You have a problem. The problem is you need to find a path to financial security, right? Kids in Hamilton, we actually ask school administrators, what's your biggest problem? Currently, it's lack of proper footwear, especially warm footwear, because families don't have enough money for shoes, and kids are outgrowing shoes. So yeah, we donated 730 pairs of boots of various sizes, winter boots, to the kids in Hamilton. And yeah, that's what we do. We it's never the same. We're constantly pivoting. But yeah, whatever the need is. And the cool thing also is that we bought wholesale. So for example, the boots that we bought, they retail for $80. We bought them for wholesale plus another additional 20% off because we're a registered charity. So we were paying $28 per pair of boots. So every dollar that we receive, it goes much further than anyone else can do, right? So
that's pretty amazing. Can people still donate for this year's Christmas campaign?
Any donations now will be for next year. We delivered on Friday, and we'll have another delivery this week. So yeah,
that's wonderful. So is it Easter next year? Is your next thing, or when's your next event?
We're gonna probably push it to May 2-4 because accountants don't like it when we do charity work during tax season.
Oh yes, that's right. Okay, that's understandable.
Yeah. So my wife's accounting practice, they're a big part of the charity work too. So then we need to be more accommodating to them for the timeline.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Erwin, for giving back to the community and for supporting. As a real estate investor, I think that this is something that's really important, is that we make sure that we are supporting our communities in multiple ways. So our next, just a quick invitation. If you are not already a member of my Facebook groups, I would love to have you come out. Canadian Real Estate Investing Mastermind. This is where we talk about and answer questions and network and get to know how we can support each other, whether we're new investors or seasoned investors. And the Canadian Real Estate Investment Hub. This is if you have an off-market opportunity, if you're looking for a joint venture partner, if you have or are looking for private lending, this would be a great place to connect with people who can help to fulfill your goals. And here is where you can find any of the panelists on the webinar this evening. Myself, Sarah, Rob, and Erwin, we'd all love to hear from you. If you have any ideas about great guests that everybody can have on their podcast, or things you'd love to hear talked about, I know you guys are super responsive and would absolutely love to hear what sort of burning questions people have. Please sign up and or download and sponsor. What's the word I'm looking for? Subscribe. That's it. The S word. Subscribe to all of these amazing podcasts and support our hosts. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out this evening. It was such a pleasure to have you all here. And my very first webinar for 2022 is with 7-time Airbnb superhost Andrew Skopik, and he's going to talk about blowing up your bottom line. So it's how do you take your income or your revenue from your business and level it up and make it grow like you've never seen before. So maybe you're struggling to find those new investment opportunities or to get a property under contract. Let's take a pivot. Let's look at your portfolio and figure out how we blow up your bottom line and increase your returns. He can specifically obviously speak to Airbnb, but he has a number of strategies that he uses when he helps business owners just generally increase their revenue overall. Thank you so much for each and every one of you for coming here. I wish you all a happy holidays. We can stay, I'll stop the recording, but we can stay and chat if anybody has any questions that they want to just ask you one-on-one afterwards or off the recording afterwards. Thank you so much for coming, guys. It's been such a pleasure. Wish all of you a happy holidays. Stay safe, and we'll see you in 2022. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much.